From the moment I bought my property on the outskirts of town, I knew I wanted nothing to do with the HOA. The idea of handing over control of my land to a group of self-appointed neighbors who seemed more interested in power than community just didn't sit right with me. They claimed to protect property values and maintain order, but I saw through the facade. To me, it felt like a cage, one that suffocated freedom and individuality. When I politely declined their invitation to join, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't subtle, not even close. At first, there were strange glances when I went to the neighborhood gatherings, barely concealed whispers that stopped when I approached. I brushed it off, telling myself that it was just paranoia. But the harassment started almost immediately. First, the emails and letters arrived, demanding payments I never authorized, threatening fines for non-compliance with rules I had never agreed to follow. Then the notices about supposed violations, my lawn being too unkempt, a mailbox not conforming to standards, even a claim that my driveway's gravel was unsightly. I checked the official HOA covenants thoroughly, knowing my rights and limitations, and found nothing that applied to my property. Still, the harassment grew. At first I thought the missing garbage pickup was an unfortunate mistake. One week, my trash was left at the curb, rotting under the Texas sun, a pungent reminder of neglect. When I called the waste management company, they insisted everything was normal on their end. Then neighbors started telling me their trash had been collected, but not mine. I couldn't shake the feeling it was deliberate. The mail situation was even more unsettling. Letters, packages, even bills vanished without a trace. I checked with the post office multiple times, but they assured me deliveries had been made. The truth? Someone was intercepting my mail, an invasion of privacy that left me vulnerable and frustrated. Important notices for my wife Laura's chemotherapy treatments were delayed or lost, adding dangerous uncertainty to an already stressful situation. The vandalism was the final straw. One night I found deep scratches etched across the side of my truck, my only reliable vehicle. The tires had been slashed, and the rear window smashed in with a rock. Whoever did this wanted me to know I wasn't welcome here. I reported it to the police, but with no leads or witnesses, it was a dead end. I couldn't help but suspect. The HOA was behind this. Maybe Barbara or her supporters. Barbara Malone wasn't just any HOA member. She was the president, the de facto queen of this small but venomous kingdom. She had a reputation for being ruthless, cunning, and unyielding. Her son Tyler was involved with Meridian Real Estate, a company notorious in the county for aggressive land deals and shady contracts. Rumors swirled that Barbara's influence within the HOA was a tool to boost Meridian's business by intimidating homeowners into selling or paying exorbitant fees. I'd seen Barbara at meetings, her voice dripping with false concern, as she lectured neighbors on compliance and community standards. Her smirks when she thought no one was looking, her cold stares directed at me. Everything suggested she had personal vendettas, not community welfare, on her mind. One night after my truck was vandalized, a neighbor I trusted slipped me a photo, captured by a hidden camera. Tyler Malone, crouching near my vehicle with spray paint cans and a crowbar. The evidence was damning, but confronting Barbara or Tyler felt dangerous. I needed proof and a plan, not reckless accusations. Determined to fight back, I delved into the property records and HOA documents. After hours poring over legal jargon and old agreements, I found something vital. My land was explicitly exempt from the HOA covenants. The previous owner had negotiated that clause, and it was clearly recorded in the county registrar. This was the turning point. Barbara and her cronies had been bluffing the entire time, using intimidation tactics to force me into paying fees I legally didn't owe. This realization filled me with a mix of anger and relief. Anger at their deception and abuse of power, but relief that I now had a legal shield. I confronted Barbara at the next HOA meeting, armed with the documents and copies of correspondence. Her face betrayed nothing, but I saw the flicker of panic behind her eyes. The room fell silent, neighbors exchanging uneasy glances. Barbara sputtered, then accused me of disrupting community harmony, of being a troublemaker. But I wasn't backing down. With every word, I dismantled her lies, exposing the extortion and corruption festering behind the HOA's polished image. The harassment didn't stop. If anything, it escalated. Knowing Barbara's reach and influence, I realized I needed concrete evidence to protect my family. I installed a network of security cameras around my property, discreet but wide-ranging. A few nights later, the cameras caught movement. I watched in disbelief as Tyler Malone appeared with an accomplice, both wearing hoodies and gloves. They approached my truck with malicious intent, spray-painting slurs and smashing windows. The footage was crystal clear, their faces visible, despite attempts to hide in shadows. I took the videos to the police, finally armed with undeniable proof. This time the investigation gained traction, but the local PD's involvement was complicated. Barbara's brother-in-law was the police chief, and he quietly downplayed the findings, warning me to let things cool off. It was clear the fight wouldn't be easy, but with evidence, legal exemptions, and growing support from neighbors. Tired of Barbara's tyranny, I felt ready to take the battle to the next level. When the harassment escalated, I was lucky to have a friend in town named Jacob, a sharp lawyer with a reputation for taking on powerful adversaries. Over a few cups of coffee at the local diner, I laid out the entire nightmare, from the fake fees and threats to the vandalism and mail theft. Jacob listened carefully, his eyes narrowing with each detail. "You've got a solid case," he said. "The HOA is abusing its power and violating your rights. But these types don't back down easily. They'll try to wear you down, isolate you, scare you into submission." He agreed to help, offering to draft cease and desist letters and prepare legal challenges to Barbara's fraudulent demands. With Jacob's backing, I felt a surge of hope. But the HOA didn't wait to respond. The intimidation grew worse. Mysterious notes appeared on my door, thinly veiled threats warning me to stop stirring trouble. My phone rang late at night with silence on the other end. Neighbors who once nodded hello now crossed the street to avoid me, their faces blank or fearful. Barbara's cronies spread rumors, painting me as a troublemaker, a man unwilling to be part of the community. The isolation was nearly as painful as the vandalism. The battle wasn't just legal, it was psychological warfare. I thought the worst of it was behind me until the harassment seeped into my daughter Sarah's life. Sarah was a bright, driven college student studying biology and dreaming of a future far from this toxic neighborhood. But one afternoon she called me, her voice shaky. "Dad, someone's been following me to class," she said. "I saw a couple of people from the HOA parking lot taking pictures and whispering. They've been leaving notes in my locker, mean, threatening stuff. They want me to tell you to stop." Hearing this, my blood ran cold. The HOA's vendetta had crossed a dangerous line, dragging my family into their twisted game. I wanted to protect Sarah, shield her from this ugliness, but I knew the fight was no longer just mine. I reported the harassment to the college's security office, but they were slow to act. The campus didn't want the scandal, and Barbara's reach seemed to stretch even there. Every day, Sarah felt more alone, more anxious, and I felt helpless. One late afternoon, I decided it was time for a face-to-face confrontation. At the next HOA meeting, the tension in the air was palpable. Barbara sat at the head of the long table, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid. When I stood up and asked to speak, a hush fell over the room. "I know everything," I said firmly. "Your harassment, the fake fees, Tyler's vandalism. I have proof. You and your cronies have crossed a line, and this ends now." Barbara's lips curled into a thin smile. "You're making a mistake," she replied coldly. This community is built on rules and respect. You chose to stand against us." The room erupted in murmurs and gasps. Some neighbors looked uneasy, others hostile. The meeting dissolved into chaos, Barbara's supporters loudly accusing me of being disruptive, a troublemaker. But I stood my ground. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about reclaiming control, exposing corruption, and protecting my family. The harassment turned physical one dark night. I was asleep when a deafening crash shook the house. I ran outside to find Barbara's SUV had smashed into the side of my home, leaving a gaping hole and sending splintered wood and glass everywhere. The neighbors woke, rushing out to see what happened. Barbara stumbled from her vehicle, disoriented but unharmed. She claimed it was an accident, blaming brake failure or a medical emergency. But I knew better. This was an escalation, a message meant to intimidate, to scare me into silence. The damage was severe, repairs costly, but the real damage was the realization that Barbara was willing to go to any lengths. I called the police immediately, but the investigation was frustratingly slow. With Barbara's influence, it seemed like justice would be just out of reach. Following the SUV crash, I filed a formal police report. I provided all evidence: the security footage, the vandalism history, and witness statements. I hoped this would bring accountability, but it didn't go as expected. The local police chief, Barbara's brother-in-law, handled the case with suspicious indifference. Investigations stalled, leads weren't pursued, and officers seemed reluctant to question HOA members. It was clear the PD was protecting their own. I pressed for updates, attended hearings, and met with city officials, but the political ties and community power dynamics worked against me. The system felt rigged, designed to protect those with influence and crush dissenters. But I refused to back down. I started documenting everything, gathering neighbors who had suffered similar abuses, and planning to take this fight beyond the local level. Frustrated by the police and city officials' refusal to act, I decided to go public. I contacted a local investigative reporter named Emily Torres, known for exposing corruption in small towns. After a tense meeting over coffee, I laid everything on the table: the fake HOA fees, the harassment, the vandalism, Barbara's SUV crash into my home, and the police's reluctance to intervene. Emily was intrigued and sympathetic. She promised to look into it and said she'd keep my identity confidential if needed. Over the next few weeks, she dug deep, interviewing neighbors, uncovering past HOA complaints, and piecing together a troubling pattern of abuse and cover-ups. When the story finally ran in the local paper and online, it sent shockwaves through the community. For the first time, the facade of a friendly neighborhood association cracked, revealing the intimidation and corruption beneath. But it also made me a bigger target. The media exposure hit Barbara and her supporters hard. But rather than back down, they struck back fiercely. Overnight, rumors began circulating, lies that I was unstable, that I had financial problems, or that I was trying to sabotage the community for personal gain. Flyers appeared on windshields, social media posts, mocked and maligned me, and neighbors who had once been indifferent suddenly avoided me altogether. Even some of my oldest friends started to question me, influenced by the relentless smear campaign. Barbara held secret meetings, rallying her supporters to isolate me socially and economically. Local businesses refused to serve me and my daughter. Sarah faced increased hostility at school. The community I once felt proud to be part of was turning against me. Despite the isolation, I found strength in the stories of others. Quiet conversations revealed neighbors who'd quietly paid extortionate fees, faced harassment, or had their complaints ignored by the HOA board. I started organizing informal meetings in my backyard, inviting these neighbors to share their experiences. The numbers grew. Farmers, retirees, young families, all united by the desire for justice and an end to Barbara's reign. Together, we formed the Glenwood Ridge Coalition for Fairness. We drafted a list of demands: transparency in HOA governance, fair fee structures, accountability for damages, and the removal of corrupt officials. Our coalition held town hall meetings, sent petitions to the city council, and sought legal advice to fight back collectively. The community's fear was giving way to hope and solidarity. Empowered by the coalition, we filed a class action lawsuit against the HOA for harassment, fraud, property damage, and civil rights violations. The legal filings detailed Barbara's abuses, the intimidation tactics, and the complicity of city officials. The lawsuit caught the attention of the state attorney general's office, which launched an official investigation into Glenwood Ridge's HOA practices. The news further rattled Barbara's grip on power. For the first time, the system seemed to be working in our favor. Evidence was collected, witnesses interviewed, and Barbara faced mounting legal pressure. The community watched closely as the once untouchable HOA leaders were finally held accountable. After months of legal battles, hearings, and media coverage, the HOA board voted to remove Barbara from her position as president. The evidence was overwhelming: financial misconduct, abuse of power, and deliberate harassment. Her removal was a victory not just for me, but for the entire community. Slowly, neighbors began to reconnect. The coalition worked with new HOA leadership to implement reforms and rebuild trust. Repairs to my home were funded partially through settlement money, and Sarah started feeling safe at school again. Though the scars of the past remained, Glenwood Ridge began the slow process of healing. I realized that standing up, even against overwhelming odds, could bring real change. Our community's strength came from unity, courage, and refusing to be silenced.